I think back of something just came to my mind during COVID when it was like one of those cold nights and there's nothing to do in the winter and everything's shut down and you're like just kind of feeling glum and sorry for yourself. And my daughter and I was like, what if we just went out and let's go buy 10 bouquets of flowers and just go deliver them to people? And it was so fun. Like it was nothing and we had nothing to do. So it wasn't even a huge sacrifice, but it just that act of like dropping off flowers at the door lifted our spirits so much.
What if generosity wasn't something you reacted to, but something you actually built into your life? Because most of us want to give. We care about our communities, our churches, the people around us. But between the busy schedules, fluctuating income, and trying to stay organized, it's easy for generosity to become inconsistent or even forgotten. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Neighbourly, a podcast geared towards stories to inspire us to love our neighbors better. I'm Johan, your producer, and today Shannon sits down with Tammy Kyte, one of the people behind GiveWise, a platform designed to make giving simpler and more consistent. But this isn't a conversation just about a tool, it's about a bigger question. How do we make generosity part of our everyday lives and not just something we think about when we're asked? So let's join Shannon and Tammy at the table.
Tammy, thank you so much for coming on the Neighbourly podcast today. I've been so excited to have this conversation. I think it's going to be a little bit of a unique conversation than some of the usual ones, but I think it's going to be just as meaningful. And I can't wait for our audience to hear more about you and hear more about GiveWise. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Shannon. I'm excited to be here. And yeah, I'm excited because I just visited your beautiful city a week ago for the very first time. And the people there are just so warm and friendly.
Oh, I'm so glad. I love Winnipeg. We always kick us off with the same icebreaker question for everybody. So growing up, who was a neighbor that you will never forget?
Yeah, that one took me a little bit of thinking because I grew up in the country and so we didn't have a lot of neighbors. So I was thinking, who can be in place of my neighbors? And in light of that, we're talking a lot about generosity today. I really thought of my aunt and uncle who we got to spend a lot of time with. And so they didn't live next door, but it kind of felt like they did because we spent a lot of time together. My cousins were much younger. I got to boss them around and babysit them along with my little brother. But my aunt and uncle were very special in that they were so generous. And I just remember like going out for dinner with them all the time. Our parents would argue back and forth about who got to pay the bill. And they were just like super generous with their giving. And in my later years, after I finished university, I worked for a nonprofit for a year and they were like some of my biggest supporters. So I would say that they're family and substitute for neighbors.
Yeah. I think those are some of the best examples of neighbors that we can have, even if they like live close or not. Family that really shows us what generosity looks like is some of the best examples.
For sure.
Well, I'd love to introduce our audience to you. You and your husband had built a successful home building business for over a decade. Just tell us a little bit about that season, what that was like, and just what was stirring in you during that time.
Yeah, we loved what we did. We started by building a couple of houses for ourselves and just kind of built and flipped. We were both teachers at the time. And so, we had summers off. We thought we might as well do some extra work. And it was a great season. It was fun working together. We had our unique roles as a couple and we're able to build up some equity doing that. And it was a bit of a crazy time. We started having kids at that time. We have 2 kids. And, as a mom, it was a little crazy trying to be in business and raise your kids. But it also gave me the amazing opportunity to have them with me a lot of the times and swap off with my husband for different things. So it was really a great start to a family and a great start to a business. Although we loved building and we loved the work, we loved the people that we worked with. We felt a strong purpose in building homes and the various relationships, but we also wanted to always tie our success with involvement in the community and just thinking, beyond the construction. But just the idea that not everyone has the ability to build like a very nice custom home. And so it made us start thinking about ensuring what can we do to ensure everyone has access to something as foundational as housing.
Yeah. It's a neat evolution then to hear what the core then kind of was, it sounds like, before, like the origin before GiveWise was GiveWise,
Mhm.
that there was always a mission. There was always something there for your family, that you knew that this was more than just about building homes, but creating access, it sounds like, for everyone.
Exactly.
So when you and your husband started building GiveWise, what were you trying to solve, or what problem were you trying to address through that?
Yeah, basically a couple of things. When we learned about the concept, it really struck with us because it's like a charitable bank account. And I won't get into too much detail yet, but the idea is that when you're a builder, you have really high income years and really low income years. We realized this is something that we could really use because it would help level out our giving, and also it would help. I don't like administration. Can be messy and disorganized. And so trying to keep a spreadsheet and finding all the receipts at the end of the year for the accountant was never my dream. And so the idea that it could all be in one place really spoke to both Dan and I. So we were really just excited about the idea.
Yeah, I'm excited to get a little bit more into the practicality of GiveWise. But first, just talking about that shift from going from this business that you were building and then starting GiveWise, I guess, how has that changed your view of generosity, or has it changed your view of generosity today?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. I was reflecting on that this morning. And I guess the biggest thing is that I feel like I've always thought that generosity is innate and it's in all of us, but it needs to be part of our everyday life, not just when we're asked. And so, how do we ingrain that into our lives, into our kids' lives, into those people's lives around us? And I really realized that a lot of it is storytelling and visibility to the needs and giving people a simple and easy way to make it happen, because people's lives are busy and they're complicated, and we were business owners and we worked with a lot of other business owners and young families. There's a lot of things going on, but how could we simplify the act of giving and not have these complicated spreadsheets so that it felt fun and there was more of a joy in it?
I love that. And you kind of touched on this earlier, that, giving is for ordinary people. And I think there's sometimes a perception or misconception out there that we have to have a lot to be able to give. Why does it matter to you that giving be so accessible and it not just be for those that do have more significant wealth?
Yeah, I think really a lot of it has to do with the individual. Like giving, we think it's for the other, and it is, and it's important, but it's also for us. It's for ourselves, right? And it's so true. Like there's so many times where because it's simple, I can just give easily. I already have the money put aside. And then there's such joy that comes in that giving. And I'm talking through the eyes of GiveWise, but in a broader context, we all know going out and just meeting a need that we see in the community, whether it's money or time or whatever. It's a such a great practice to do. I think back of something just came to my mind during COVID when it was like one of those cold nights and there's nothing to do in the winter and everything's shut down and you're like just kind of feeling glum and sorry for yourself and my daughter and I, because everybody lived at home at that time. I was like, what if we just went out? Grocery stores were still open. Let's go buy 10 bouquets of flowers and just go deliver them to people.
Yeah.
And it was so fun. Like it was nothing and we had nothing to do. So it wasn't even a huge sacrifice, but it just that act of like dropping off flowers at the door lifted our spirits so much,
Yeah,
So I think it's so much for the giver as well.
absolutely. Well, let's get into more of what exactly GiveWise is. How would you explain it to someone who is hearing about it for the first time, or you're just with friends around the table? What would you say?
Yeah, so GiveWise is an online giving platform. So it's in the form, so you set it up like you make any online account these days, your name, your email, you confirm it, and then you have a giving fund with GiveWise. And the giving fund acts like a charitable bank account. So you get to put money in and give out at any time. So it allows it to kind of separate those two things. Can be together. You could put money in today, give it out today to your favorite cause or your favorite charity, or you can put it in, save it up for a bigger project or something like that over time. And then it organizes everything in one place so you can see what you've given throughout the year to each charity and just keeps everything organized. And my favorite is you have one tax receipt at the end of the year, always available in your GiveWise account.
Wow. And how does that I'm already thinking about for myself having one tax receipt would be so nice. And in our house we have to file two countries' taxes each year, and so I'm just like, "Oh, that would be so nice."
Absolutely.
From what you've seen, how does things being centralized really change that experience for the donor, for the giver?
Yeah, I think it's just really quick and easy to act on because just like if you go on vacation, often you'll put money aside. That money's already there for vacation. Then you don't feel bad spending it on
Right.
vacation or whatever it is. You don't have to think, oh, what else am I going to have to cut out to do this or whatever. It's just already set aside. And so I think that's a really big thing. It keeps it top of mind as well because you're putting money aside for charity. And it just removes some of that admin and decision fatigue when you just get things cleanly set up in that way. And yeah, I'll just give you one little story the other day from my own experiences that I was reading an email and getting caught up on some emails and friends of ours who help raise funds for work that's done in Myanmar, and a country that has been in civil war and so much unrest. And they needed a motorcycle there. And it was a small need. And I was like, boom, I already have that in my
Mm,
GiveWise giving account. I logged in, I gave. 2 minutes later, I was done,
wow.
And so it's just like, there's not those extra steps, I guess, to make it happen. And in today's world, if we can pull off something quick and easy and get a quick win, I think that gives us a little bit of a boost and also meets a need in the world, which is really cool.
Yeah. At the beginning of our conversation, you talked about when you were starting your business, there would be kind of an ebb and flow with income and how that worked just in that type of business. Can you explain how this solves for that and how, this works in a simple way to kind of address that generosity doesn't have to be so up and down?
Yeah, absolutely. So for us as builders, for example, I think most of your listeners are probably old enough to remember the 2008
Mhm.
market mortgage disaster when all the real estate plummeted. So for us, we had a couple of houses sitting out there. We live in BC, and so those houses are $1 million
Right.
plus for sale. And, there was just no buyers. And in years like that, like how do we keep giving to our church, our compassion child, our community center, our food
Mhm.
bank? Everybody still needs the money. In fact, they need it
Yeah.
even more during those times. And so in those times, we always tried to still give, but it was often more difficult. And had we been able to put money aside from those very high years, you can put that money in your giving fund and it can sit there and it can accumulate and you can keep a bit of a balance, just like a bank account. If you think of, we always teach our kids, you have your emergency
Mhm.
fund, right? You have to have like 5 grand for emergency in case your car dies or
Right.
whatever it is. It's kind of like that. So you just have that money sitting aside there for charity and you can give it out in those lean times. And so I think it's a great way for Canadians to just keep a small amount in there, not like you want to keep a whole huge piece in there for no reason because that money is needed by charity. But I think a small amount is good for those
Yeah.
times. But also, with business owners, you may sell a business or you may inherit everyday Canadian, you may inherit money and you might have a big estate tax, like all of those things. So there's really beneficial ways and there's complex ways that we won't get in here, but that people can benefit
Mm-hmm.
from tax wise as well, to put bigger amounts in there and then give it out over time.
It sounds like there's just so much opportunity across sectors because you mentioned church, you mentioned nonprofit organizations or child sponsorship, that I can only imagine the different kinds of stories that people have had from using GiveWise. I'd love to spend a little chunk of time here and just hear some of those stories of someone whose generosity grew, or what are some of those things that come to mind?
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I don't get to hear, I think, a lot of the stories, right? Because I mean, people just go on with their
Right.
merry way, but a few testimonials and things that we've seen I can share. And so, in the early days when we just launched and every day we'd sit on the platform and see, oh my gosh, is anyone signing up yet for this? It always stuck with me that there was somebody who was a young professional just out of university in their first sort of job. And it was so neat to see him put in consistently monthly, year over year over year. And just that consistency with the gifts every time, probably, I don't know the scenario, but every time maybe that he got a paycheck, he put something in. It was like
Wow.
every single month without fail, and then granting it out. So that was really neat to see younger people as
Mm-hmm.
well just get on board with that and start that habit of generosity. And then there's also somebody in their later half of life, who was probably in their mid 70s or so. They started to understand some of the complex assets and the way that you can give
Mm-hmm.
those and the tax savings that happen when you do that. And they were actually able to add like a zero onto their
Wow.
gifts. And that was really fun for everyone. And I got to talk to this donor, and it was like, this is so cool. I mean, who wants to pay more in
Right.
tax? Nobody.
Right.
You can unify people, conservative or liberal, wherever you are on the
Yeah.
spectrum, but nobody really wants to pay more in tax. So if you can see those tax dollars going out specifically to needs that you're passionate about, everybody's on board with that. So that's one of the really cool things that I see that it allows you to do.
Wow. Thinking back to starting GiveWise and now where you're at and all the growth that you've experienced, what surprises have you had? Is whether it was being surprised about, somebody who was using the platform, or just things that have come up that you didn't expect? Does anything come to mind there?
I think the biggest surprises recently is, you kind of grow in your own community, and that's really cool because it's word of mouth and that kind of thing. And it's really neat now to get this word out across Canada. And that's what we're seeing. So it's really surprising and delightful to see it grow in Alberta and Saskatchewan and
Mm-hmm.
Manitoba and Ontario and across all the way to Eastern Canada. And we have a partner now in Halifax who's bringing us clients. So we've kind of got
Wow.
C to C. And so that's really, really fun. And I think the second thing is what I touched on in the last story, but the consistency in giving. Like, there's a lot of very faithful people who give small amounts, but very consistently, which is really encouraging. But something that maybe I wasn't aware of before. So that's cool.
Yeah. It just, as you were talking, it got me thinking about my own experiences with generosity. And so much of what I have learned about giving and being generous has come from watching my parents set that example for us,
Mm,
just like you were saying with your aunt and uncle. And I think really at the time, I think I took for granted as a kid what I was observing and how my parents were not just consistent in giving towards in their tithe and to our church, but in other ways. I think about when I went to university, we would always do, every student went on a mission trip, like a short-term mission trip in the spring, and everyone had to raise their own support. And even watching my parents give towards friends of mine that, they weren't necessarily invested in that student, but they were invested in them, even if they didn't know them personally. And so I guess you talked a little bit about the example you're trying to set for your kids. What have you noticed, or what have you learned, and what it means to teach your children about generosity?
yeah, and I think it goes much further than money. I think it's in all areas, but I'll just focus on the money because that's sort of what we're talking about. And obviously, it's a huge part of generosity. For us, it's been really, really neat because since our kids were little, every Christmas we would give them a gift that we said was for charity. And so, whether maybe it started at $100 or whatever, and it was like, where do you want to give this?
Mm-hmm.
And we usually start with the gift catalog,
Mm-hmm.
and they might pick a cow for a family or whatever it
Right.
is. And they would, say their why. And then as they got older, we were able to then once we started GiveWise, we have this functionality where I can put money into my account and I can give it to my kids'
Oh,
account
cool.
or your account or my employee's account. And so through that transaction, my husband Dan and I could move that into each of our kids' accounts, and they can now, they're adults now, they're 21 and 23. They can decide where do they want to give that
Mm,
money. And their grandparents have also done that on some Christmases. And so they end up with this neat lump of money in there. And I think it's just part of like just having conversation and being intentional as families around that. And this platform just gives you the opportunity. It's not like it's the magic answer, but it just gives you the opportunity to do it easily. And then for that discussion to happen around the table, right? Like, where did you give? Why? What's close to your heart?
right.
What matters to you most? It's just a really great conversation, I think, that we can all have with our kids and our peers and those around us.
Yeah, that's powerful because like you said, we always say with Care Portal and what we're doing with Care Portal, it kind of takes the guesswork out of compassion. And it sounds so similar with GiveWise. It really takes the complexity out of being generous and it's another way of being a neighbor. And I think we're always looking for those ways that simplify it, that make it easy to do, but have a greater impact. And so it's neat to hear that because I think your own kids, I'm sure, are going to then be able to pass that on to their generations and their generations. And it's legacy building.
For sure, for sure. And what seems like a small tool,
Right.
and often technology is the tool, right? Like for Care Portal, that's a tool that you're using. The GiveWise
Exactly.
technology is similar. It's like the be all and end all, but it is a tool. And when you have that tool in your tool belt, it just makes life a little bit easier.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, if somebody is listening to this and they care about their church or they care about some organizations and they're not sure where to start, what is maybe one simple step that they could take this week to get a little bit more intentional?
Yeah, a couple of things. I think one thing is just the consistency of generosity is so important. So, just like anything, exercise, eating healthy, taking your vitamins, it's the daily that helps so much. And not to pick something big and overwhelming, but just to pick something small. And so I suggest to people like monthly giving, I know just matters so much to charities
Mhm.
because they know that money is coming. They know they can keep the
Right.
lights on and keep doing the amazing work that they're doing. So, set up monthly giving, I would say is really awesome. Whatever your paycheck is, put a little bit aside for that. That's something that I think most people can do. And there's times that you can't, and that's okay. And maybe it's more time that you want to spend on something, but make it a small decision and make it intentional and I would say consistent. And then the other is for those who do have some extra, just actually take the time to think and learn and educate yourself on tax efficient ways to give. Because I see a lot of people not giving in the most tax efficient ways. And when they do and they learn and they educate themselves and their advisors take the time or their accountants, I see much bigger gifts going out
Mhm.
and more impact being made. And that's where it's at, right? So,
Those are some great practical steps. And one last question I have for you before we wrap up. If there is somebody listening who's thinking, I don't really have that much to give, I don't have that much extra, does this really matter? What would you say to them?
yeah, absolutely. Every gift matters. Pooled impact is real. We've had different people do different things. Actually, I forgot about this, but years ago, we don't even know where she came from or how she found out about us. But in our very early years, a young girl I think she was doing a run or something. And so she used our platform, which you can do,
Oh,
and you
yeah.
get a giving link, and she decided to fundraise. And she brought in so many small gifts. I mean, they were $10 gifts, $20 gifts, $50 gifts. But in the end, she raised a few $1,000s for her
Wow.
cause. And it was just really cool to see. And every week, how the platform works is money goes in, it gets pooled together, and it goes out with everybody else's to that charity.
Okay.
And so it just shows that pooled impact really makes a difference. And then I would also say back to the idea of like bringing joy to the giver, right? So even if you don't have much to give, when you do give something little, you feel a part of something and a part of a community. And it can just boost your spirits as well. And just, sometimes we just have to, we're all like this. We can become inward looking.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that inward looking does not bring joy. And so, or
Yeah.
peace, or we're looking at the news and those different things that are happening, and that the world's not a great place to live in. And it feels overwhelming. So I get that. But at the same time, I think just pick one thing and do that and be consistent with it, and just feel that joy and peace that brings.
That's so good. That's so good. Thank you, Tammy. Thank you so much for coming on and not just describing this incredible platform, but I think you've really inspired me in just thinking about how can I change, or how can my husband and I look at our own finances and think about it as this is just about bringing joy to others and making an impact that goes far beyond what we can see, but also internally challenging us to think outward. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
The stories we share here remind us that care does not have to be perfect to be powerful. It just has to be present. Neighbourly is an initiative of CareImpact, a Canadian charity equipping churches, agencies, and communities with technology and training to care better together. This episode was produced by Care Creatives Co., a social enterprise of CareImpact. If you're building a podcast and want help with strategy, editing, or full production, visit carecreativesco.ca to connect with us. I'm Johan. Thanks for listening, and keep being the kind of neighbor someone will never forget, in a good way.
Sister, take my hand. We'll stay working on lawyers turning over tables, breaking off chains. When I see you in a stranger,